So Mike, come on up. Mike Brown is the Executive Director of NASCA, the National Association of Conservation Agencies. And just a little bit of a background, there's approximately 50 that do kind of what I do. Would be considered executive directors in their local state. Together we make up a national organization called NASCA. There's approximately, so you know, not all states are structured the same. Mike actually told me out in the hall earlier, there's about 20 to 30% of the states are independent bodies like you guys are. The State Soil and Water Conservation Board, political subdivisions associated with that state board. A lot of them may be in departments of ag, TDA, like our Water Development Board. The Natural Resources Agency may be a subdivision. I think we're proud in this state to have our standalone structure. It makes us a lot more independent. It makes your voices a lot more independent working through your state board and your association. So Mike is our executive director, and he coordinates all of our efforts all over the country. So I kid about saying he's a celebrity. Actually, he kind of is. He travels all over the country and works with groups like this, again, all over our country. So Mike is very, very well thought of in the world of conservation. He's very well thought of by NACD, which is obviously the other end, not just the agencies, it's the conservation districts. He works with them also very closely. So we are very fortunate. When I asked Mike to come to see if he would come down and speak to the group, he was very readily accepted, but he also said that he would be videoing the entire conference. So that's a good thing. If our conference might can help, I know you put them on all over individually, but if what we do here can help other states across the country, we're more than willing to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike. We're very fortunate to have him. And just remember now, you're the only thing that stands between this group and a nice hamburger from Don Brandenburg. You're the obstacle in the way.
Yeah, Rex, I kind of feel like I got a raw deal because I had to follow John Foster, who I think is one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He's the guy with answers. I'm just a guy with questions. And then I stand between you and, as Rex described it yesterday, perhaps the finest hamburger ever known to mankind. So I'm going to attempt to be brief, but I promise you it's not really one of my strengths. Before I get started in my presentation, I do want to pile on to a question. I don't know who asked it, but somebody asked about the difference between point source and non-point source pollution. And John gave a good answer to that. In general and traditionally, we have thought of point source pollution as something coming out the end of a pipe. It's coming from one distinct point, where non-point source pollution is kind of overland flow, coming from a broader geographical sense, okay? There's a court case in Iowa right now, and you may have heard about it. The city of Des Moines, and I'm not going to do this justice, but I'll kind of give you the basics. The city of Des Moines gets the city's water supply from surface waters flowing into the city. And they have to treat that water, and it's an expensive process. And I guess, Rex, that court case was probably filed a year and a half ago, something like that. But the city is suing some of the upstream water districts for sending polluted water to Des Moines, and their argument is that it's ratcheting up their treatment costs. So ordinarily we might not get too excited here in Texas about that, but one of the things that the litigants are trying to establish is that water in ditches, surface water in ditches, should be considered point sources, okay? Now, if that happens, it changes everything we do. It's a game changer for all of us, okay? Because traditionally we have thought that the water in those ditches has come from overland flow and even some subsurface flow, depending on where you are. And now if that's considered a point source, then it falls under a whole different regulatory authority and things. Regulation is something I'm going to talk about today. So keep your eyes on that court case. Even our folks in Iowa are standing on the sidelines on this one and waiting to see what comes from this. But it could be a huge court case that affects all of us. Rex told you that I travel around a fair amount, and it wouldn't be fair to say that I live on the road, but I'm on the road a lot more, honestly, than I would like to be. I spend a fair amount of time on the road, and today's a big day for me. I get to come down and spend some time with you, and I really enjoyed your session yesterday. A lot of great information, and hats off to Rex and his crew for providing that. But at the end of the day, I'll be home tonight, and trust me, I don't take that for granted because it doesn't happen as often as I would like for it to. And as this day closes, I'm going to crawl into bed next to my wife, and I don't take that for granted either. And when I do, she's going to look at me and say, well, how'd it go? And I'm going to say, baby, you should have been there. I packed the house. Now, I'm not going to tell her that we had to shrink the house like this to pack it, but no, I'm excited about being here. Rex asked me to tell you a little bit about NASCA, and then I'll tell you just a little bit about some of the things that are going on nationally. Now, I am not from Washington, D.C. Let's get that straight, okay? I work from my office in Delaware, which is a stone's throw from Washington, but I promise you, I don't want to spend any more time in Washington, D.C. than I have to, just like I suspect none of you would, but unfortunately, it's a necessity. All right, so let's talk about what NASCA is. Rex told you it's a National Association of State Conservation Agencies. And first, I should tell you what it's not. It's not a consulting company, it's not a trade organization, and it's not a marketing firm. NASCA essentially is a group of folks working in the states all over this country who recognized that good ideas don't stop at the state line. And our membership, I can promise you, there are no internal politics in our membership. Our members genuinely go out of their way to help one another and to trade good ideas. And membership, and I can tell you, because I used to be a member, not a staffer, but membership in this organization absolutely makes you better at what you do at home. And Rex, as a member, I hope you feel just that same way. It's the way I always felt as a member. Our members are folks like Rex Isom all over the country, okay? But it's not just the executive directors or whatever their title is, administrators or directors of their agencies. It's also every employee they have working for them, okay? So there is a substantial membership as far as numbers go for NASCA. This is our mission, and essentially years ago, our board of directors decided that they wanted to focus on two things: member services and representation on a national basis, okay? So in our strategic plan, and you guys have talked about that some, but in our strategic plan, we now have four major objectives. One of those is member services, and we do a lot of things for member services, not just for our members, but our partners as well. We do district official training, just like you've been through in the last day and a half, in a number of states when states ask us for help with that. Obviously, Texas doesn't need our help because they've got a great program of their own. We provide webinars at least 3 times a year. We open them. They're free. We open them up to our members and our partners. But the subject matter is what our members tell us they want to hear about. We put together some different tools for our members. We have one that's called Ask NASCA. And if you go to our website, which is www.nascanet.org. And it's important that you remember that, because I know you're going to forget. You're going to go to NASCA.com. And when you do, you're going to be at the site of the North American Swing Club Association. I kid you not. I'm not saying it won't be informative, but you're not going to find what you were looking for. So again, NASCAnet.org, okay? One of the tools we have there is this thing called Ask NASCA. And if you have a question and you wonder how things are done in other states or in different parts of the country, you can simply type in a question, hit the submit button, and we will send that question out to every state in the country. Now, sometimes, depending on the nature of the question, some states may have information to share with you. Perhaps it doesn't apply. But those that do will reply, and the information will come back directly to you. And within, give folks a few days to respond, but within a matter of days, you've reached out to folks all over the country to see how they do things compared to how you do them here, okay? Now, I talked about national representation, and this is what we call the National Conservation Partnership, our core partners. So that's our symbol top left. We've got NACD, NRCS, the National Employees Association, and the RC&D councils, okay? Traditionally, that's been our national partnership. We work with these folks in DC to try to get policy developed that best benefits our members, and we do a lot of things with these partners. We're represented on all of NACD's committees and RPGs. Their CEO, Jeremy Peters, and I are in constant contact. He and I have a formal sit-down meeting at least once a month, but we're in contact all of the time. We sat on their district official task force that finished up their work last year. Have you heard of the National Conservation Planning Partnership? That's an effort nationally to kind of reinvigorate conservation planning on the landscape. I co-chair that with Astor Boozer, who's a Western Regional Confer for NRCS out of DC. We went out to Denver last year and helped the National Employees Association with their strategic planning. They asked us to come out and facilitate that for them. And what we wound up with was a whole new strategic plan. We started from scratch, rewrote everything. So their organization today, they have adopted that strategic plan, and today, moving forward, they're a completely different organization than they were just a year ago. This national partnership has quarterly partnership meetings where we'll sit down with the chief, the president of NACD, and all the leaders get together, talk about a path forward, and also get updates on things that are coming. I'm going to talk about RCPP in a little while. We knew about that before that program hit the street. So it's a good opportunity for our organizations to trade notes and have a good idea of what's coming down the path. Now, I told you we have 4 general objectives in our strategic plan. One of those is to remain a financially sustainable organization. And the reason that's there is some years ago, NASCA was simply spending too much money, to be quite frank. So this is a chart of our annual budgets over the years. And you can see back in 2008, 2009, we really pulled the reins in. We hit a budget low in 2014, and we were proud of that. In fact, our budget in 2014 was less than half of what it was in 2008. And we feel like we're getting more done today than we were in 2008. Now, since that time, we've realized we pulled the belt just a little too tight. We included a couple more things. This increase you see in 2017 is simply reflects the inclusion of some services we offer our members that we hadn't included in the budget before. Things like scholarships to attend meetings and that sort of thing, which I think Rex, your folks have been able to take advantage of. This is new, and our board of directors just added this objective to our strategic plan this year. Ensure the sustained prominence of locally led conservation. And I was thrilled to hear so much of this type discussion at this meeting. Somebody made the comment earlier that some of the states in the East and the West don't feel the same when it comes to conservation delivery as Texas does. And I can tell you there are individuals in those states and different parts of the country where that's a fact. What I will tell you though is our membership, just like Conservation District's membership, typically all support this idea of the voluntary, incentive-based, locally led model of conservation delivery. And it's important enough to NASCA that our board instructed me to include this in our strategic plan. Now, if you look at conservation district boards across the country, they're doing honorable work, and Rex and I talk about this all the time, is how good and decent these people are, not just in Texas, but all over the country. And if you look at the work they're doing, and you compare it to those conservation district boards that got this whole thing started back in the late 30s and the 40s, you see a lot of similarities, and much of what's being done is traditional and hasn't changed a whole lot. And there's value in that. However, there's also some peril in that. The reason being, we live in a changing world. There's just no question about it. Things are changing at a dramatic rate. I'll give you an example. I read an article a couple of years ago, and in this article, the author said, take a look at technology, and somehow, if you could take all the technology that's been developed up to this point in time and could characterize that in some sort of volumetric measure. Let's say that it represents the size of a tennis ball, okay? He said, go through that same exercise 20 years from now, and the volume it represents will be the size of the sun. That's how fast technology is evolving and is expected to continue evolving, all right? So, changing world, give you some examples. And this is just in the past year, okay? In 2016, these billboards went up in the state of Washington, calling for greater regulation on agriculture. The only thing that was a saving grace to this was this group, whatsupstream.com. They used some federal EPA money to pay for these billboards. And so the conservation community was able to put pressure on EPA and make them, make EPA make these folks take those billboards down. So they have been removed. However, that's temporary. I can promise you, as you travel around the country, in the years to come, you're going to see things like this going up, not just in Washington State, but across the country. All right? Another example, and again, this one also popped up in Washington State. This report was done by a group called the Western Environmental Law Center. They were paid $590,000 to draft this report. What this thing says is we need to stop relying on voluntary conservation, and we need to invest more heavily in regulation. The Environmental Working Group came out with this report, and I don't know if you can see the text in the back, but the title of this thing is Fooling Ourselves: Voluntary Programs Fail to Clean Up Dirty Water. Much better. Thank you. Again, call for more regulation. And thank goodness that the EWG has a senior vice president for agricultural and natural resources. Now, I don't know Mr. Cox, but I don't know if he's ever worked in agriculture, has any real world experience or not, but he's got a great title. And this is a quote out of that report, and they refer to the way that we do business, that the way we've done business for 75 years, that's proved undeniable results. You know, you've all heard about Hugh Hammond Bennett and the dust storm that enveloped Washington, D.C. That dust blew all the way from the Midwest to D.C. when he threw back the curtain and convinced Congress to come up to fund a new agency that was ultimately called SCS. That doesn't happen anymore. So we have got some undeniable results. But they're referring to this as the failed voluntary approach, okay? And speaking of EWG, it's funny how timing works out. Because yesterday, when I was in your training session, I got an email, and on that email, it had a link to testimony that EWG provided on the Hill just yesterday, okay? The House Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry had a meeting to talk about voluntary conservation programs. And I'm going to share with you a few quotes out of their testimony. I am not paraphrasing. I'm not making anything up. These were quotes word for word that came from yesterday's testimony. And I don't like to read slides. I think it makes for a lousy presentation, but I am going to read some of these to you. Unregulated farm pollution is a leading source of water pollution and a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. Voluntary conservation programs have largely failed to meet the pollution challenges posed by agriculture. Now, this guy has nothing to do with EWG, and I'm going to get back to their testimony in just a minute, but this last quote, the voluntary conservation has failed to meet the need to address pollution, reminds me of a guy named Chuck Fox. And I don't know if any of you know Chuck, and I don't know him personally, but I know him professionally. He was the EPA appointed head of the Chesapeake Bay program, okay? And I was at a public meeting where Chuck Fox stood up and said, what we're doing, and keep in mind what we were doing there, my farm is in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which in a sense is a blessing, but it's also a curse. Chuck Fox stood up and said, what we're doing in Chesapeake Bay isn't working, period. Water quality today is no better than it was 20 years ago, okay? What he didn't say is the human population in the Chesapeake Bay watershed had doubled in that same 20-year period, okay? So when we see things, statements like this, these are spins, and you know as well as I do, you can spin information any way you like it. Let's go to some other quotes, and again, directly out of this testimony submitted yesterday. Many capital-intensive infrastructure improvements currently funded by conservation programs should instead be financed through an expanded conservation loan program. So what they're recommending, and here's a recommendation to Congress, is instead of providing money for cost share to help the folks who actually invested in our landscape do things to implement conservation, that the burden of that implementation should be solely on the landowner. And perhaps we can provide some loans, but they will have to pay those back, even though there's an environmental benefit to the community at large. And this last one I've got from this testimony, USDA should finance a narrow set of practices enhancements to address a narrower range of resource concerns. So thankfully they've got Mr. Cox who can tell us what's best for all of us on our home operations. Good they've got an expert on staff, so somebody in DC can tell us across the country what's going to work best and limit the tools in our toolbox to address those environmental concerns based on what the environmental working group would like to see. Thankfully, we've got a couple of folks in our corner. Hopefully you all know the guy on the left, Congressman Conaway, the chair of the House Ag Committee from right here in Texas. This fellow on the right you may also know, the past chair of the House Ag Committee, Frank Lucas, who is currently the chair of the subcommittee on conservation and forestry in the House. And those are both dramatically important roles. Both these guys from the South Central region, and I do believe they have your best interests at heart. But it's going to be imperative that the message from Texas about what we really need to go through Congressman Conaway's office. And in spite of those good people in place in those positions, I want to show you where regulatory activity at the federal level has been over the last 50 years. This chart on the left represents federal regulation spending over the last 50 years or so, okay? Now you might say, well, okay, that's a great graph, but we would expect some increase simply from inflation or what have you. Today's dollars being worth less than the dollar bill was 50 years ago. The chart on the right graphs out federal staffing dedicated to regulation. And you see a very similar picture. And it's interesting, you see a little dip during the Reagan years in the White House in both of those. But I think the take-home message is it was a temporary reprieve, but over the long haul, that's what it was. It was temporary. So many of us may be thinking about the current administration and what that's going to mean from a regulatory standpoint. I believe that it may lead to a correction, but over the long term, I kind of expect these graphs to continue. Okay, and we can't just blame the feds. Even at the state level, we're seeing increased regulation. Here, a couple examples: Kentucky and Oregon both require conservation plans on every agricultural operation. Okay. Now, we all know conservation plans are a good idea, but I think we get a lot more done when we approach landowners through the voluntary incentive-based model. And in these two states, it's now mandatory. And you probably heard about the law that was passed in Minnesota just this past year, the Minnesota Buffer Law, that now requires riparian buffers. Let's go to some other comments coming out of DC. The World Resources Institute, and they're not necessarily calling for more regulation, but they're criticizing the work of what I'll call the traditional system, our traditional partnership, by saying that we have ineffectively targeted those federal resources that are available. This group agree. Have anybody heard of them? There's some heavy hitters in this one, okay? At least one former USDA secretary is a prime member of this group. And this is a quote from one of their publications saying that the traditional system, which is us, simply is incapable of addressing current environmental issues. I disagree, but I can promise you groups like this are getting some traction. Now, after 75 years of success and marvelous successes that we've had across the landscape of this country with this voluntary incentive-based conservation model, why do you suppose all of a sudden that we're hearing so much criticism? And the examples I've given you are a drop in the bucket. There are tons of them out there. I will tell you this, and this is just anecdotal. I can't apply any data to this, but most of this naysaying that I've heard has been since 2007, 2008, when the economy kind of went south. And I believe that because conservation at the federal level now has enough money to draw attention, when the economy went south, some of these folks came up with new strategies to get their hands on some of this money they used to go out through the more traditional avenues. So what once was the voice of conservation in America, I believe now is a voice. And there are a lot of groups getting into the game. And the ones I'm going to put up here are just a a drop in the bucket. There are hundreds and hundreds of different organizations throwing their hat in the conservation delivery arena. And some of those, like our friends at EWG, are even not only trying to get in, but a strategy is to try to say that we've done a poor job over the last 75 years. Another quote, again, from EWG, sounds like I'm picking on them, but they just give you so much good material to work with. They're saying, RCPP, and are you all familiar with that program? The Resource Conservation Partnership Program, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, but it came out, it was brand new in this past Farm Bill, okay? It's a wonderful program because it's going to help us better target federal conservation funding. And I'm going to show you some real numbers that I think speak to that. But RCPP came about in the last Farm Bill, and essentially it was a combination of 4 former programs. CCPI, which was a Cooperative Conservation Partnership Initiative, the AWEP program, the Chesapeake Bay Initiative, and the Great Lakes Basin. They combined those 4 programs. They went out of existence. They rolled out this new RCPP program. This is how it was funded. Congress said, okay, we'll give you $100 million in CCC funding, but then we're going to take 7% from EQIP, CSP, ASEP, which is the easements program, and Healthy Forests. We're going to take 7% from each of those programs as well and roll into RCPP. Now, I will tell you that I was kind of chicken little when this thing rolled out, because what I envisioned was this RCPP being used as a pilot project, and if it was successful, then this 7% turning into much greater numbers in the next Farm Bill. And I went to the chief and I asked him in one of those quarterly partnership meetings, I said, this is what my gut's telling me, am I right? Is this a pilot program that could be rolled out on an expanded basis in the next Farm Bill? And he didn't want to answer me, but ultimately he did. And he said, yeah, that's the way it's been explained to me. So nobody, a few years ago when the last Farm Bill rolled out, nobody got real excited about this other than me. I was chicken little, I'll admit. Because they said, well, you know what, it's only 7% of these programs. That's minor, don't worry about it. What worries me is we're starting to work on the next Farm Bill. And what would happen if that 7% of EQIP turned into 50%? Because the way RCPP works is you have to apply competitively, essentially with the world at large, for these funds. And so groups that make their livings writing grants and are very good and very polished at it have a leg up on conservation districts, which typically that's not how we're busy working, okay? We're not the best grant writers typically, and so we fall behind. Here's the other piece of RCPP. In this Farm Bill, they split the funds up into 3 pools. The national pool was 40%. What they call the critical conservation areas, which were some established regional areas around the country, were 35%. And the state pool was only 25% of the money. Now, where conservation districts have been successful in getting their hands on some of this funding has pretty much, and not 100%, but most of the projects where districts have been successful have come out of the state pool. We stand to fare a little better at that level. In the next Farm Bill, and I don't believe RCPP is going away, even if they give it a new name, I think it'll be the same or similar program. But I would like to see that allocation change to maybe 75% of the funding going to the state pool rather than only 25%. Now, I know this is a horrible slide, and you probably can't read all the numbers, and that's not the point of this thing. But what I did here is I took the first round of RCPP funding, which was actually represented the first 2 years in the Farm Bill. I took out, or I listed all of the project awards through that grant program, and then I took out everything that looked like it had something to do with the conservation district. Okay. In round one, $184 million of federal conservation funding went out the door to groups that appear to not be working in conjunction with conservation districts. In round two, which actually represented year 3 of the Farm Bill, I did the same exercise. That number came out to $155 million, okay? You know, in the grand scheme of things, again, we're only talking about 7%. You may not think these are big dollars, but they're big enough figures to get my attention, all right? And if this represents 7% of EQIP, if that was bumped up to 30 or 40 or 50 or 60% of EQIP, you see where the numbers are going, okay? And you could argue, well, Mike, hold up, because I see a project there where a district or some districts were involved. I'll grant you that. I didn't research every single project. I just pulled out what looked obvious. So this is money going out the door to non-district entities. And I should state this. Don't be down on NRCS for RCPP. This was not their program. This came from the Hill. Congress came up with this program, okay? So some folks went directly to Congress, lobbied to have this program put in place, and I can tell you at the end of this end of this Farm Bill, that this experiment, if you will, is going to be reported back as being wildly successful. Because the people that went to Congress and got this program put together, I believe, are on this list. And obviously, they scored a lot of resources out of the program. And they're going to go right back to Congress and talk about how successful it was. And our NRCS has done the best job with it that they could. And I will tell you that they did some things to ensure that districts got at least a piece of this pie. And if they hadn't done that, then these numbers would have been even larger, okay? But they've been responsible for managing the program. So they too are going to report that it's been a success, because let's face it, they're not going to go to the Hill and say, you know what, we dropped the ball on this one, it didn't work. So everybody's going to talk about what a huge success this was, and I fear that the next Farm Bill, we could see more of these federal dollars going in other directions. Now, if you'll recall, I told you, and I showed you a quote that EWG, the Environmental Working Group, said that this program does a great job in helping us target federal resources. When I look at this list, I see money going in 100 different directions. So again, it's another spin. Now, I showed you a list of organizations that are getting in conservation delivery, and there's another presentation that I do when I talk about how do we compete with all these groups. And the answer is we don't. These are not primarily conservation groups. They're primarily fundraising groups. They're good at what they do. In fact, they're great at what they do. They're very professional, and that's why they're good at writing grants for RCPP. It's something they do every single day, all right? I'll give you an example. One of the groups I put up there was the Nature Conservancy, all right? Active in every state, and whether you like them or not, a very professional organization, a well-run organization, okay? I pulled their 990, which is the form they have to fill out as a nonprofit, for the last 3 years reported. And in those years, each of those 3 years, they had obtained between 110 $140 million each year in grant funds, okay? When I tell you that these folks are professional fundraising organizations, I mean it. They're good at it, okay? I did some research, and before the economy went south, they were scoring grants in the mid 200, $240, $50 million range annually. All right, so that they're good at these. In fact, TNC's CEO came to them after a career of 24 years with Goldman Sachs. These folks are the best there is, all right, when it comes to fundraising. They're also great marketers, and I use this as an example. Perhaps this is not as big of a deal in this part of the country as it is where I come from. But 20 years ago, nobody would have ever dreamed about heated seats in a vehicle, okay? Today, it's a feature that I believe it's still an option in many vehicles, but it's at the point of becoming just standard equipment. The automotive industry are great marketers, and marketing is more than just advertising. It's making consumers believe that they need the product that you have available to sell, okay? Nobody better than the automotive industry. Here's just one example. Now, we expect heated seats in new vehicles we buy. Let me tell you what the new heated seat in conservation is. It's sustainable agriculture, okay? This whole concept of sustainability. Now, I'll put a definition up for you. Doesn't that sound like the work conservation districts have been doing for 75 years? I believe it is, but you know what? We haven't been very good marketers. And these groups are treating sustainability like it's a brand new concept and it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they invented it, and that is what's going to lead conservation investment in the years going forward. Mark my words on that. This is big. Give you an example. Anybody recognize this guy? This guy's name is Jason Weller. He just went out as the chief of NRCS in DC, okay? His last day at NRCS because of the administration change was January 20th. He started a new job just this week. He went to work for Land O'Lakes up in Minnesota, the butter company, okay? Any guesses what his title is? I kid you not. Keep your eye on this sustainability piece. Even though we have been doing it for years, it's being marketed as a brand new thing, and it is going to continue to draw resources its way, okay? Somehow, Rex, we need to figure out how to better market sustainability and demonstrate that we've been doing this for 75 years. Okay, so this whole attack on the voluntary incentive-based approach to conservation delivery is one of the things that NASCA said we need to step up and do something. All right, we just added it just in 2017 to our strategic plan. One thing we have done already is launched a website, and it's important that you write this down. whyconservationworks.com, okay? This is not a .gov website or a .org website. We wanted to do this as a .com, all right? And this website is going to be dedicated solely to success stories, conservation success stories, based on the voluntary and incentive-based approach to conservation. What we need from each of you is to go to the website, and you see the button up top there that says submit your story over here on the right? If you go to the website and click on that, Aaron has put together a very simple format for you to write. And odds are you've already written out these success stories in different local publications and reports and what have you. We would like you to help us populate this website, and my vision for this is hundreds, even thousands of these success stories. So when people make comments like the voluntary approach to conservation isn't working, we can go, you need to go do your research. Okay? We want this thing to be chock full of successes about the voluntary incentive-based approach to conservation. And then before I close, I want you to know that I don't want to come across that I'm down on all these other groups that are trying to get into conservation delivery. Certainly, they bring some great ideas to the table, and I think some of those folks are doing some good work. But at the end of the day, you folks have something that they don't have. You have a fiduciary responsibility, and you talked at length about that yesterday. You are legally responsible to the landowners and operators in your conservation districts to manage your district resources for their best benefit. These other groups don't have that fiduciary responsibility. So we can't say without a doubt of what their motives are. Yours we can. Because at the end of the day, what's important to me, what's important to NASCA, and what I believe is important to our entire partnership is this guy. Our cooperators, our landowners and operators all over the country. And with that, Rex, I'll close. Thank you.
I think we should do better than that. Let's stand up, give him a standing